Today I'm here to talk about Talis. This is a picture of the main report. I did not bring the main report because it's 450 pages and it's too heavy in my suitcase. It's big like this, and I don't think that I need it to show you. I will just speak very briefly about maybe half an hour about it, but there's a lot of dense information in there. I hope that I will motivate you to go and read more about it and learn more about it. We have some documentation available in Spanish. We have a country note for Spain in Spanish, as well as this document here, which I'll show you here. I have a printed copy, which is also available in Spanish. It's a summary of the report, but not a normal summary like we usually provide at the OECD. This summary is directed at teachers and school leaders. So it's a summary of our findings, but also gives ideas about what our data show might be good ideas to implement in the schools. Over here? Okay. Okay. Oh, the streaming is over here. So this basically gives good ideas of what teachers and principals can do in their schools to improve the learning in the school based on the Talis data. So all of these documents are available on our website, and I will give you the website at the end of my presentation, as well as the data which is available. So I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more after my presentation, to go there. So why is a study like Talis important at the OECD? Why are we doing this? This is the second time that we do Talis. We did the first cycle in 2008. Now 2013 data was the second one, and the next one will be in 2018 in 5 years, so every 5 years. And the reason why this is important, or that we believe that this is important, is because we know from research, there's a lot of empirical evidence that show that in schools, other than what students bring to their learning, teachers are the #1 factor that influences student learning. And so if we want our students to learn better, if we want better student achievement, we have to focus on improving the teaching that's happening in the classrooms and in the schools. But we have very little internationally comparable data about teachers and about learning conditions in schools. In fact, a lot of countries have their own national surveys of teachers, own national data, but there was nothing internationally that we could use to really start a dialogue between countries to share best practices and to try to improve teaching and learning. So Talis came in 2005 and 2006 when we started developing it to really try to fill key data gaps, both nationally in countries that didn't have any data on their teachers, but also internationally to be able to compare across countries. So there were 24 countries that participated in Talis 2008, and now we have 34 countries in 2013, and we expect to have even more countries participating in 2018. Okay, so let's see if this works. No. This one here? Oh, if I point to there? Okay, I'll try. Oh, to the computer. I'll try that. So what Talis is a survey. It's a survey, an opinion survey of teachers. We surveyed over 100,000 teachers in the 34 countries. It focuses on lower secondary education teachers, although in some countries we also surveyed primary as well as upper secondary teachers. This presentation focuses on lower secondary teachers, but there's more information in the big report about the other teachers as well, and in 6,500 schools. So in each country we surveyed about 200 schools, and in each school we had about 20 teachers. These are randomly selected, and they're representative of about 4 million teachers in these 34 countries. And these teachers were asked questions on a survey that they either took online or by paper copy, and they were asked questions about their working conditions and the learning environments in their schools. And we also had a separate questionnaire, separate survey for the school leader or the principal in each one of these schools. And the types of questions were about their backgrounds and about the development that they get, the practices they use in the classrooms and collaboration they do, and so many of those questions. Okay, so no, this is not working. I'll just use this. So a few words about the learning environment and characteristics of teachers in schools. The first slide I want to show you is about the teaching experience that our teachers have. You'll notice throughout the slides that I've tried to highlight in yellow the findings for Spain, just so that they're easier to see on the graph because we have a lot of countries, and the average is in blue here. So this is the average, the Talis average. So what this graph shows here is that on average, teachers in Spain in particular tend to have more experience, more teaching experience. And I'm not very surprised by this result, because another piece of data that we have that I'm not showing here is that they also tend to be older than average. So an older teaching workforce which has more teaching years experience. So as a teacher here, we can see almost 20 years of teaching experience in Spain, compared to probably just over maybe about 16 in the international average. So that's a really, really valuable resource. You have a population of teachers that has a lot of experience, and we know that with experience, teachers gain in terms of confidence in their ability. They gain in their experience in managing discipline problems in the classroom. So we know that this can be a good resource. Sometimes it can be a problem. There might be resistance to change or less confidence in using ICT and technology. So there's a balance that needs to happen. But this is basically what we're seeing in Spain. The white dots are the years of experience in the current school that the teacher when they filled out the survey. Now we know from Talis that for a majority of Talis countries, it's very difficult to attract the most experienced teachers to the schools where they're the most needed. And the schools that they're the most needed are challenging schools, schools where perhaps the student population is more challenging. And in the next graph, you will see that for all of the countries that are on the right side here, and I apologize, the lighting here makes it difficult to see, these are countries where more experienced teachers are more likely to be in less challenging schools. So the schools where they're the most needed are not necessarily the schools that are getting the most experienced teachers. And Spain falls in this category. It's these countries here on this side where the most experienced teachers are more likely to be in challenging schools. And this can be a problem in particular when we look at the shortages of resources, human resources, that are identified by school principals. So here what you see is the percentages of teachers who work in schools where their principals say that, for example, there's a shortage. The first one is teachers with competencies in teaching students with special needs. And so on average in all of our countries, this is the highest or the most common type of shortage of resources in schools, teachers that can teach special needs students. In Spain, it's even higher than average. In Spain, that need is even higher. In Spain, there's also a high need of support personnel that this says that this is lacking, as well as computer and software for instruction compared to the international average here, and internet access. So these are important resource shortages that are identified by our principals in our survey. Now, how can we develop the teachers that we already have in the system and make sure that they can make the best of their abilities and they can develop further? This is a striking graph here that I'd like to show. This is the percentages of teachers who basically are in schools where there's a formal induction program. So induction programs normally are for new teachers, either new teachers to a school or new teachers in the profession. And the idea is that this induction program will help them face some of the challenges they will meet when they first arrive in school. And what we can see here is that in Spain, very few teachers work in schools where there's a formal induction program compared to the international average. International average is about above 60%, and in Spain it's just above 20%. So much, much lower. In fact, if you look at some countries over here, like Singapore, for example, or England, it's virtually 100% of teachers work in schools with formal induction programs. So there's a huge difference, and definitely a gap in an area for improvement for the support of new teachers here in the schools. Mentoring is another area of support for teachers. At the bottom here, we can see the percentages of teachers who say that they have a mentor, presently have a mentor that helps them. And here you can see countries like Singapore or Brazil, Abu Dhabi, they have high percentages of teachers who say they have a mentor that helps them. The average is very low, just above 10%, and Spain is even below the average down here. And this on the y-axis is the percentages of teachers who work in schools where there's a formal mentoring system available. And again, Spain is at the bottom here, with some countries like the Netherlands having a very high availability of mentoring for teachers. This is the participation in professional development. You will see that there's pretty high levels of participation in continuous professional development. 71% of teachers on average say that they've done some kinds of courses and workshop in the past 12 months. In Spain, it's a bit lower at 67%. And in fact, in Spain, you will see that the numbers tend to be lower for pretty much every activity except a couple of them down here. So in Spain, teachers are less likely to say they've taken part in some professional development in the past 12 months compared to the Talis average. However, for those teachers who have taken part in professional development, it tends to be for more days. So the average days for courses and workshop internationally is 8, but it's 18 in Spain. So the professional development, when it does happen, tends to be longer. So that can be a positive as well. But it's the quality as well that we need to look at. And here we have what teachers are stating are the highest needs for further professional development. And this is basically not just saying, oh yes, I wish I could take a little bit of professional development. What I have, the percentages here, I've restricted only to those teachers who say I have a high level of need in these areas. Across all of the Talis countries that participated, we have teaching students with special needs being a very, very high stated need by teachers. And we know that this is also a resource that is lacking in a lot of the schools based on principals report. So here we see also teachers saying they need more development in this area. But I'd like to draw your attention to one particular area of need in Spain that is higher than average, and that is teaching in a multicultural or a multilingual setting. And a much higher proportion of teachers, almost 20% in Spain, say that they have a high level of need of professional development to help them deal with the very diverse classrooms that they have in terms of multicultural or multilingual students in their classrooms. So that's something that's perhaps more specific to this context here. And when we ask teachers, why are you not taking part in more professional development? What stops you from getting more development? The number one reason internationally, as measured by all of the Talis countries, is conflicts with the work schedule. In Spain, however, is that there's no incentives or that there's no relevant professional development available. So if there's no development available, and it's even if the teacher is motivated to take this professional development, if it doesn't exist, that's not very helpful either. So it's important to look at the barriers as well that teachers themselves are identifying. Teacher evaluation, or what we call teacher appraisal and feedback in our survey, is very important. We know this not just in terms of helping teachers identify their weakness areas or areas where they need to improve, but also to celebrate great teaching or recognize great teaching in the school and be able to share it as well. So Talis has a lot of questions about, in the survey, about the types of appraisals and feedbacks that teacher will receive in the school. And we know that in general, only one teacher in 5, so this is for all of the Talis countries, report that they've received feedback from at least 3 sources. Those 3 sources might be the principal, other teachers, an external evaluator, another member of the school management team, whatever. So at least 3 sources. Well, it's only about 1 in 5 teachers that has said they've ever received feedback by more than 3. And just over 1 in 10, so that's 10% of the teachers say that they've never received feedback from anybody ever on their teaching. And that's a really big number. In Spain, it's 3 in 10. So it's 30% of all of the teachers in Spain say they've never received any kind of appraisal or feedback on their work. Essentially, these teachers are working in their classroom with the doors closed on their own, and they're not getting any kind of information about how they're doing. And that's a really big problem. We know that appraisal and feedback, especially if it's done in a meaningful way, in a way that can have positive impacts on the teacher's work and teaching practices, not only affects what they're doing in the classroom, but affects teachers' confidence in their own abilities affects their job satisfaction in addition to affecting positively what's happening in the classroom. So this is the percentage of teachers who say that they've received feedback after direct observation in the classroom. So the number of teachers, the percentage of teachers that say yes, the bars here are, they're saying that the principal has come into the classroom and has observed me and then has provided feedback. In Spain, it's happening almost never. In Spain, only about 10% of the teachers say that their principal comes into their classroom to watch them teach, watch them work, and provides them feedback. The average is about 40%. And we have some countries on this side here that are above 80%, above 70%. And we know from previous work that we do at the OECD, work, for example, from Paulo Santiago and his team on the assessment framework, that classroom observation is a key source of information that needs to be taken into account for teacher evaluation and teacher feedback. So that this is not happening in Spain is problematic. It's also not happening from anyone else from the school management team or from other teachers. So teachers, again, are just not being observed in their classroom. And this is the impact that they say that their appraisal. So for the very small proportion of teachers who say that they are getting feedback, this feedback is leading to positive changes in these three areas. So we have on the left, personal attitudes, things like motivation, job satisfaction, and knowledge of the subject field. Then we have in the middle behavior, so classroom practices, student assessment practices, and the ability to deal with behavioral problems in the classroom, so this is here. Then on the right side we have professional changes in the profession, so changes in pay, changes in advancement, career advancement, or access to professional development. So in general, between 40 to 70% of the teachers in Talis say that there is some positive change in this area, in these areas, after they've received feedback. But in Spain, in every single one of these areas, there's fewer teachers that identify positive change in these areas. And already we know that the sample of teachers is even lower here because many don't get any feedback at all. So this is a problem because, as I mentioned before, teachers who receive meaningful feedback, this is feedback that they say has an impact on their teaching practices, these teachers are more likely to use effective forms of teaching practices in the classroom. They're more likely to say that they have high job satisfaction, and they're more likely to have high confidence in their abilities. Now, looking at teaching practices in the classroom, we know that teachers also face challenging classrooms. This is the proportion of teachers who say that they have at least 10% of their students that fall under these characteristics. And again, Spain is in yellow here. So we see that low academic achievers are most commonly identified in the classroom, but also students with behavioral problems and students from disadvantaged homes. And sometimes students have more than one of these characteristics. So these are challenging classrooms, and teachers need to be prepared to teach these diverse and challenging classrooms. We've asked teachers in your classroom, while you're in a lesson, how much time do you spend actually teaching and learning, and how much time do you spend doing other things like dealing with behavioral problems or doing administrative tasks. And what you can see is that in a lesson, so a lesson should already be 100% teaching, it's about 80% of the time that's spent on actual teaching and learning. This is what teachers are reporting us. They're saying about 80% of their time is for teaching, and the rest is on administrative tasks or keeping order in the classroom. I'd like to shift a little bit to talking about collaboration between teachers, because this is a very key message, very, very important message from Talis. There are different kinds of collaborative behaviors that teachers can have. Here on the left, we're going to look at more simple forms of what we call exchange and coordination behaviors. These include things like discussing individual students between teachers or exchanging materials, sharing teaching materials, team conferences, things like that. Then here on the right, we have more complex forms of professional collaboration. This includes, for example, team teaching or preparing or participating in collaborative professional development. These are the types of more complex professional collaboration that we know from Talis are number one associated with higher levels of self-confidence, higher job satisfaction, but also higher levels of using effective teaching practices. So this is the proportion of teachers who say that they do these things at least once per month. Here we have very high proportions of teachers who do these more simple forms of collaborative activities, but very low proportions that do these more complex forms. And in Spain, it's even lower for something like team teaching, for example. We're looking at at about 10%, just above 10%, who say that they, at least once per month, will do some kind of team teaching. On average, it's above 20, but even that is fairly low given the evidence that we have that this is an effective form of teaching. In terms of teaching practices, our report also asked teachers, actually our questionnaire asked teachers how frequently they use these types of practices in a typical, they were asked to choose a typical lesson the previous week that they were teaching at, say, 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, and say, so in that school, in that class, how often, frequently, or in nearly all lessons, did you use these techniques, these teaching practices? And we can see the proportions again in yellow for Spain, and you can see that at the bottom here we have some specific types of practices that we describe them in the report as being more active or student-centered practices. And I know you can't read this, so it's really small, but for example, this one here is having students work in small groups to come up with a joint solution to a problem, or using ICT for solving projects or problems, or working on projects that require more than 1 week to complete. So these are projects, the types of practices where the student really has to be involved in the learning. Can't just be sitting, listening to somebody lecturing like I'm doing right now with you. So these techniques here, we know from research, are effective, more effective in producing learning in students, but we also know that teachers who collaborate in the more complex forms of collaboration that I showed you before in Talis, our research shows that those teachers are more likely to say that they use these techniques more often. Okay, so we also know that teachers who collaborate in more complex forms lose less time in dealing with behavioral problems in the classroom. So collaboration is really important. We know that the school leader's job, most important job, is instructional leadership, is to help teachers improve the learning environment in the school. Many researchers have identified specific behaviors and specific actions that good school leaders who show good instructional leadership do. What they do is they encourage teachers to take responsibility for their student learning. They encourage teachers to take responsibilities for their own learning, to improve their teaching practices, and they create an environment that is conducive to collaboration between teachers. They create a climate where collaboration between teachers is accepted and is the norm, okay? And so these responses are from school leaders, and they look at the proportion of school leaders who say that they've engaged often or very often in these types of behaviors. And I'd like to draw your attention to the last one here, where it's observation in the classroom. And the reason I'm drawing your attention is because as the data from our teachers show us, the principals are also telling us that they don't do this very often in Spain. In Spain, it's very uncommon for a principal to go into the classroom, observe the teaching, to then provide feedback to the teacher, which is problematic because that should be a number one job of the school principal, okay? One of the most important things to do. Part of the reason for that might be because in Spain in particular, and most countries that are on the left there, it's very unlikely that they will receive any kind of instructional leadership training, either before or during their tenure as a principal. They are not taught themselves how to be a good leader in the school. And so that might be one of the reasons why they are actually not doing things like classroom observation. It doesn't seem to be a core part of what their role is seen to be here in Spain. So this is definitely a problem. And I'd like to finish by talking a little bit about teacher confidence or self-efficacy, so it's confidence in their own ability, and teachers' job satisfaction. And the reason we know this is important is that Talis doesn't measure teacher effectiveness. We don't go into the classrooms to give tests to teachers to see what their knowledge is and to see how effective they are. We can't do that. That would be very expensive at an international level like this. But what we do ask teachers is how confident they are in their own abilities to teach their students, to engage their students, and to deal with behavioral problems in the classroom. We know from research that teachers who have high confidence in their own abilities are teachers who tend to do better in their class as well. They tend to have students who perform better. We also ask teachers about their job satisfaction, because we know that if you want a teacher to stay in their job and not have high levels of attrition in your profession, you need to have happy teachers. So we ask teachers about how happy they are as well and how valued they feel in society. This graph shows the proportion of teachers who feel that their profession is valued in society. On average, about 31% of teachers say that they feel valued. In Spain, 8%. So in Spain, it's actually not quite as low as France, which is why about 5%, or the Slovak Republic, but it's pretty down low down here on the corner. So it's not very high. Now, whether or not that reflects the true state of how the profession is valued in Spanish society or elsewhere, maybe not. This is telling us what teachers feel themselves. But one analysis that we've done that is quite interesting is we found that teachers who tell us that they are involved and that they have a role to play in their school decisions, those teachers are much more likely to say that teaching is valued in society. So teachers who are treated as professionals and who are actively engaged in their school decisions are more likely to say that teaching is valued. So I think that gives us a hint about what do we do to improve perhaps the perception of teachers and teaching as being prestigious profession, is perhaps to treat teachers as such and make sure that they're involved in the decisions in the schools and other decisions and reform decisions as well. Now, having said that, teachers in general are very satisfied with their jobs. More than 8 teachers, or even 9 teachers in 10, say that they're quite satisfied with their jobs and working in their school, and that they would choose teaching again if they had to do it again. So that's good news. Even though they don't feel valued, they're still pretty happy with their jobs. Now, what affects their job satisfaction is interesting, though. Because yes, you want to have teachers who are satisfied, you want teachers who feel good in their abilities, but you also want to know what factors are associated with that. One thing we found is not associated with job satisfaction, and this might surprise you, is class size. So if you look at the class size, no matter how big the class is, teachers are pretty much equal in their job satisfaction. That's true in Spain, and it's true in pretty much all of our countries. If you look at classroom composition, there's a different story. So this shows the proportion of students that have behavior problems. So if you look at the proportion going from basically none to more than 30%, and the level of job satisfaction, the level of job satisfaction declines. So this comes back to what I was saying before, that teachers are faced with some challenging classrooms. They have classrooms with behavioral problems, students with special needs, low achievers, and this does have an impact on their job satisfaction and their feelings of self-confidence. And these relationships work for self-confidence as well. So how do we make sure that those teachers who are in those classrooms kind of are well supported to be able to provide these students with better learning opportunities? Well, one thing that can be done is to ensure a climate in the school where we can have positive relationships, interpersonal relationships, between teachers and their school leader, and between teachers, and between teachers and students as well. We know that those positive relationships, which we measure by asking our teachers what their relationships are. We know that those who have more positive relationships, there's kind of a buffering effect for teachers who work in challenging classrooms. It negates, in essence, the negative relationship that we see with job satisfaction or self-efficacy. We also know that positive interpersonal relationships in the school are related to higher levels of job satisfaction in general and self-efficacy. And also, just as a conclusion, to remind you some of the key areas where we need to focus, I think, based on the overall results, the more frequently that teachers say that they collaborate with their colleagues, that there's collaborative activities like team teaching, for example, well, the higher their levels of self-efficacy and the higher their levels of job satisfaction. So we know that collaboration between teachers is important. So that was kind of one of my conclusions. Another one of my conclusions is that Teachers who are provided with opportunities to participate in the school decisions also have higher self-efficacy and higher job satisfaction. So including teachers as professionals in school decisions is important as well. The more teachers report that the appraisal and feedback or the evaluation that they have has an impact on their classroom teaching, again, the higher their self-efficacy and the higher their job satisfaction. So meaningful evaluation for teachers is important. However, teachers who say that the evaluations that they receive is really mostly an administrative exercise that doesn't mean anything, then those teachers have lower self-efficacy and job satisfaction. So, if I were to say what are the ingredients for a good school with happy teachers, I would say a school where there's collaborative school environment, which often is promoted by a good school leader that is showing good instructional leadership, where teachers are given meaningful appraisal and feedback to teachers, not only from the school principal. This can be done by other teachers as well. It could be peer-to-peer appraisal and feedback. And schools where teachers play an important role in the development of the school, those schools are the schools where teachers feel the most effective and where they are the most satisfied with their jobs. Okay, so these are the key elements. These relationships were found across pretty much all of the countries that we have in Talis, not just in Spain, but in a lot of our other countries as well. So just as a conclusion, Talis was a collaborative effort. I'm certainly not alone in this. Lots of people involved. And as I mentioned before, this is the website, oecd.org/Talis. On this website, you will find this summary, which is a PDF that you can download, and it's available in Spanish. There's the main report. There's all the Spanish country note for Spain. You have the data. So we have made available free for download the micro-level database. So if there's researchers amongst you who are interested in going and looking at the data for Spain or for other countries, you can download the data directly from our website. And this is also my email, julie.bélanger@oecd.org. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie.